focus on the facts, since we know that there's a lot of speculation. What if? Will they? Won't they? Can they? Can't they? We're not going to go there. You'll hear a lot of I don't know from this side, at least. And we thought that was a little bit more honest than trying to speculate what's going to happen. But we do know quite a bit, I have to say, and I hope that this webinar will give a little more sense, a little more clarity of the directions we could be going in and the directions it is possible to go in. One important point here, I'll underline that later on as well, is that we try to make a structure that is Brexit from London and from Brussels, but it doesn't mean that there is a university sector in London and one in Brussels. It's very important. We're one university sector in Europe. No matter what happens in Brexit, that's how we will remain, and that has been the EUA line, and we believe the only logical reaction that there is to Brexit. Before we hand over to Vivienne Stern, I just want to come with a few technical remarks. This webinar is recorded. You'll be able to have the recording afterwards. It will be public. The documentation you will be able to download that as well. You'll be able to get the slides. We hope to keep this interactive in the sense that you can use your chat, and I can see people already saying hello. That's very good. Hello to you, everybody. And we will have some questions at the end of each presentation, only very factual, and then we'll open for a discussion afterwards. We will have the video presentation on the EUA website. You will have a mail with all this info afterwards. Use Vivienne Stern. Vivienne Stern is the one person who would really know about these things on the British side. She's director of Universities UK International. Universities UK is the British Rectors Conference that covers, I think Vivienne has to say how many members, but it's quite a few. It's a very big organization. She'll be able to take you through this as the director of UK International. But before that, Vivienne has also worked in the UK Parliament, so that I suppose will give her another angle to this. So, Vivienne, we'll take it over to you, and you'll explain what it looks like from your side of the channel.
Great, thank you very much, Thomas. First of all, I want to say hello to everybody who's joining this, but also to Thomas, I want to say thank you for the opportunity to air this topic with a wide European audience. I think it's really important that we keep talking. Notwithstanding the fact that I agree with what Thomas said about the very large degree of uncertainty about what the future exactly holds. And so everything I say, should be seen in the frame of the context which I think Thomas described, which is there is going to have to be some innovative thinking, some creative policy development, some consistent dialogue to get us from A to what I hope will be a satisfactory point B. But in order for all of that to happen, we have to maintain that commitment to one university sector, to a coherent higher education and research environment across Europe, and that's certainly our starting point in all of that. So I'm going to take you very briefly through the way this looks from the UK perspective, and I think then open up, I hope, how this will look from other European perspectives. So as Thomas says, University UK is the body which represents 135 UK universities, and we represent the vice-chancellors of the universities, so the leadership. And the international function which I lead is really there squarely to help UK universities foster international connections in teaching, in research, in knowledge exchange of a variety of forms. And within that function, we have quite a long-standing focus on engagement directly with European Union structures. But I have to say, in the past, we have put less effort into the bilateral relationships, and I think that is something which we see changing. So to move on, I am finding my way around this system, so bear with me. I want to just give you a brief overview of the very significant commitments made by the UK government in advance of the start of the Brexit negotiations. First of all, rather quickly after the referendum result, our government guaranteed that any UK participant in a Horizon 2020 funded project, which was successful prior to the point of Brexit, would be subject to a cast iron government guarantee. The UK government will fund the UK participation in those projects, even if they last beyond the point of the UK departure from the European Union. I think that is very important. We were really grateful for our colleagues across Europe helping us to cascade that information to deal with some of the uncertainty that existed in the immediate aftermath of the referendum result. The second thing, which has been a little slower in coming, was a guarantee that any student who wanted to study in the UK, starting in, first of all, 2017, and then more recently, those students who will start in September 2018, will enter and pursue the whole of their programme on the same basis as UK domiciled students. So they are able to access the government-funded loan, and they are able to, they'll be subject to the UK student fee. And I should make the point, of course, at this juncture, that students studying in Scotland from the European Union pay no fees. That guarantee, though, is really very helpful because I think it addresses some of the uncertainty for students. Those students starting in 2017 or 2018, they'll have the same deal for the whole of their course. And we've also seen a commitment to invest in science. And I think given that there is obviously going to be a cost to our continued participation in European collaboration, having funding committed, I think is a really helpful signal. And now, of course, we're in the middle of an election campaign, and we've got polls which are narrowing, and it's not absolutely possible to predict the final result. But the expectation is we get a Conservative government led by Theresa May return to power on Thursday, or Friday morning rather. And it's on that basis that I think I'm going to sort of, that's the assumption I'm going to make in what I say. Therefore, what she said in outlining her Brexit priorities in the Lancaster House speech made in January really remains exceptionally important. And here I want to point out that when Theresa May made the speech in January outlining the UK's priorities for the exit negotiations, she drew to the fore 12 priorities. Now, these are, in really no uncertain terms, considerable issues ranging from security to the immigration regime. One of those 12 was collaboration in research and innovation across Europe. The fact that we made that list, I think, is not insignificant. And she said, and I've quoted it on the side, that we will welcome an agreement to continue to collaborate with our European partners on major science, research and technology initiatives. But almost more important than that, she made, I think, a very important statement about the right nationals who are currently living and working in Britain. And as I'll say a little later, we're very dependent on those. And she gave a very strong signal that she would seek an early agreement on the rights of EU citizens living in Britain, alongside the rights of those living in other parts of Europe. We've also been exceptionally pleased to see some of that rhetoric reflected in the words of Michel Barnier, who will be the chief negotiator on Brexit for the European Commission. And I think it's incredibly helpful to see him starting to say things like, you know, the statement I quoted on the slide, I think it's a statement made a couple of, probably about a month ago. It's not too early to sketch out that relationship, and it will include free and fair trade agreement, cooperation agreements, particularly regarding universities and research, and partnership, we hope, in the areas of security and defence. And the reason for reading all of that is it's one thing for research and cooperation between universities to be mentioned in passing in the margins of some speech, but no, we're seeing it being referred to right in the heart of the central list of priorities, and long may that continue to be the case. For that to continue to be the case, it needs voices not only from the UK, but also at the European level and in individual member states to make the argument strongly that it's in all our interests that we find a way through to preserve this basis for collaboration in these areas. I'm going to very quickly skip over from a UK perspective what we see as the principal challenges. And there are 5, and I've listed them here. Really, for us, the biggest, probably the biggest concern of all is about access to talented staff. Universities are really as good as the people who work in them. And we're exceptionally dependent on European Union staff, particularly in research-only contracts, where they make up nearly half, non-UK research-only staff make up nearly half of our academic population. So it's really quite significant, and would be a huge loss if we weren't able to access and attract and retain those European Union members of that cohort. We're obviously very determined to preserve a basis for international research collaboration. We know that international research collaboration is simply essential to good research these days, especially when you're dealing with those, grand challenges that require expertise which no single university, no single nation can hold on its own. We are also, of course, concerned about barriers to recruiting international students, particularly European students, and on the impact on mobility in both directions, so UK students having opportunities to study abroad in Europe and vice versa. And of course, I'm taking this as my final point, funding. We receive quite a lot of funding, particularly for research from European sources, and I think in my description I rate it last because money is important, but actually it's not the primary thing that we are concerned about. Just to illustrate the point that I made about the dependence on European staff in the UK, just to give you a little bit of background, nearly 17% of staff academic staff in UK universities are from the EU, and that's up from just around about 10%, 9.4% in 2005. The proportion varies quite considerably across institutions. And then to illustrate the point about the importance of European partnerships in research, you can see that of our top 10 most frequent collaborators in research, 6 of them are European. So, we have very, very strong collaboration, particularly with Germany, France, Italy, the Netherlands, Spain, and Switzerland. But of course, if you take the whole of the European Union, our collaboration and research across the European Union counts for about 60% of all international collaboration. So it's very difficult to see the UK research base performing to the extent that it does currently without access to those sorts of networks. And of course, the student perspective, as a proportion of the total student population, European Union students are around about 5%. They're about a third of all our international students. So they're quite an important contributor to the kind of international character of our universities. And again, at different levels, that has different significance. So at the postgraduate research level, which you can see reflected in this slide, those are the people who are going to, take back with them some understanding of the expertise in research groups in the UK to other universities around Europe that they may move to in their careers, and form the little bridges that lead to future research collaboration. So it isn't just about recruiting students, it's about seeding future relationships in research and in other areas as well. We are fortunate, I think, in the UK to have seen quite a rapid diversification of sources of research funding. We have seen growing dependence in UK universities on international sources of research funding. But this slide illustrates just how much of that international research funding comes from the European Union. So those are some of the things that we are particularly concerned about. I just want to spend one moment talking about outward student mobility. I think if you look at what happened in the Brexit debate, the referendum in the UK, there was a real tension between people who saw benefits and opportunities and positive features in international engagement, and then there was a proportion of the population who really didn't see that. They didn't feel that they benefited from these sorts of networks and collaboration. They thought that was sort of irrelevant to them. Now, for us, part of our response, I think, in universities has to be to encourage more students to spend some time studying abroad. That won't solve the problem on its own, but I think that if nothing else, a lesson that we must take from the referendum is to encourage our own students to experience, study, work, life in other countries, particularly in Europe, to appreciate the benefits of international connectedness. And you can see here that those students who study abroad, who take part in those mobility opportunities, over half of those students, and it's quite a small proportion of the total, but over half of those who do go abroad currently go to Europe. So it's really, really important that we find a way of maintaining and building on that momentum. And just as a footnote, we've recently launched a campaign to double the number of UK outwardly mobile students. I better speed up because I know Thomas wants to leave time for discussion. So just to give you a sort of sense of how we're handling it at UK, we've divided our work into focusing on the short-term and transitional issues, about which I'm going to say a little bit more in a second. The thinking through the exit negotiations themselves and what our asks should be, both to our government but also to the European decision makers who will have sway in those debates. But also we have to think about the longer term domestic policy change that we'll need to see in order to be able to sustain the relationships that we want to sustain in higher education and research. I want to just pick up on that point about short-term transitional arrangements for a simple reason. We see the point of the UK's departure is likely to be spring 2019, but already the effects are going to start to bite unless we can give some security and certainty about the UK's ability to participate in programmes. Principally, we're thinking about Horizon 2020, but also Erasmus Plus, to the end of their life in 2020. We're already going to start to see the pinch points emerging, and we need the Commission and we need other European member states to make the argument these are issues that need to be addressed quickly, and certainty needs to be established as soon as possible if we're not to see some lasting damage flow from a discontinuity in UK participation in these structures. I won't go into detail of this, but but I think the points that we've made about the residence rights of UK nationals living in the UK, student finance, and participation in programmes are the focus of our debate there. For the exit negotiations, obviously we want to achieve some basis for continued collaboration. We would like that to be association to the Future Framework Programme, as long as the Framework Programme 9 is something that's broadly consistent with the excellent features of the current programme Horizon 2020. I think that's our ambition, that we should be able to associate, but we'll need support from colleagues in doing that. We want to continue to access the Erasmus scheme. We want to ensure that there's a continued basis for the recognition of professional qualifications, and we want to ensure that the regulations, the regulatory landscape is harmonised, it maintains some degree of harmonisation as we leave the European Union. And finally, in terms of domestic policy, the big areas of argument are around the future immigration regime, which we believe should be both simplified and improved to foster and to attract European nationals as well as people from the wider world. We want to see enhanced mobility opportunities, not just preserving the status quo. We want to see greater emphasis on outward student mobility. We want enhanced support for international collaboration and research. And I would argue that part of the vehicle for doing that would be through an FP9, which maintains that direction of travel towards openness to the world. And finally, we want an improved regulatory infrastructure in the UK, which makes us a really attractive place to continue to do research. I think I better stop there, with apologies for slightly overrunning my time, despite promising that I wouldn't, Thomas, and hand it back over to you.
Thank you very much, Vivienne. No worries about the time. I think these are very important things to and people write away the questions while I make it. Is that it's incredible to see how the university sector is. I think we have an echo now. Could you mute your microphone again? We do that now.
Is that a question?
Oh, there we go. Yeah, no, we're fine. We're fine. It was just an echo in the now it's gone. Okay, no, what is it? How intertwined internationally the university sector is. Now, Britain is, of course, very international, but we do see that in many other research-intensive countries where you have these quite substantial numbers of non-nationals working in the university sector and a high dependence on international collaboration. And I think we need to see Brexit in that. But that was just a comment. We have a couple of questions here for Vivienne. One is a big one. Does Brexit also include that the UK will leave the Bologna or the higher education area and the European research area process and commitment to that? Did you get that?
Fine. No, we're very fortunate in a sense that when you look at what membership of the EU means for universities, we're really lucky that higher education isn't a competence of the EU, because the Bologna process stands outside that structure. And of course, it encompasses a very much larger group of countries than the European member states. Actually, I think we'll redouble our effort to participate in the European higher education area. Whether that means a sort of a permanent process of Bologna, I think that's another question for another day. But certainly that's a really significant vehicle. And I think that point about qualification recognition, at the European Union level, we have to deal with professional qualification recognition. It's really significant in that regard. But for others, for the movement of students across this very much larger group of countries, and I think that is really, really valuable at this time. So we can reassure students that that those structures are in place to allow for their qualifications to be recognised because of our participation in the Bologna process.
Okay. One more here is a question: how much of what you have said has been agreed by the UK government, and how much is come just from the university sector?
Well, I think it's important
this is about guarantees.
Yeah, it's just important to say again, we're just on the point of a general election. Our general election is tomorrow, so we'll have a new government by Friday morning. Now, the polls suggest that our government will be a Conservative majority government and that the Prime Minister will be Theresa May, so continuity in that sense. I would say that we have a significant level of high-level, in-principle support for our for the desired outcome that we preserve cooperation. Does that mean that everybody is completely on board with the mechanism for doing that? No, those are discussions that are happening now. I think we've got significant influence. I think we've got lots of support. I think we've got good evidence. We've got fantastic, access at the right levels in government. But no, that's the work that we're doing, and it's a huge amount of work. But I'd also say that the other side of it is, I think, equally important. This isn't just about what we think. It's not even just about what the UK government thinks. It's about what 27 other member states think. So it's really important that we understand what the issues are, what the perspectives are of other member states, that we make the arguments both directly and indirectly, that we engage those people who are broadly aligned with what we want, and that we get them to put pressure on their own governments to come out with high-level statements so that the objectives are shared, and then in those crucial discussions in Council, that there we see not just one country but many countries.
Good. I just wanted to take one more of the many questions we got, and then we can continue afterwards. From the British side, what model could replace programs like Erasmus, particularly maybe for outward mobility? And do you know how much that would cost for the UK government?
So the answer to the second question is no. I think it depends on what you would put in place to replace a scheme like Erasmus. But I would point to the Swiss experience. The Swiss, I think, would very much like to be in Erasmus+, but when that wasn't possible, when that proved impossible, they created a thing called the Swiss European Mobility Programme. And it uses many of the same features as Erasmus, so it's really easy for other European partner institutions to work with the Swiss European Mobility Programme. And it's typically, in typical Swiss fashion, it's very efficient, I think. So there may be even some upsides to having a slightly lighter touch scheme. And I think they've shown us it's possible. And of course, the other thing I'd say in the UK context, Erasmus is incredibly important to European student mobility in both directions. But actually, if you look at the outward mobility of UK students, more than half of that mobility is what we would call provider-led. It's not taking place through the Erasmus scheme. It's taking place as a result of individual agreements between UK universities and their partner institutions overseas, quite often funded through institutional resources. So we would like to remain part of Erasmus, and that's what we will be arguing for. But in that, that Plan B scenario, that scenario in which that doesn't prove possible, we've already got some ideas about how you would ensure that you could continue movement in both directions.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I have to say we have record attendance of this webinar. We were up on 100 and more than 70 just a couple of moments ago, which means that there's a lot of questions, and keep on writing your questions on the chat. But I think we'll have to pick and choose. Ask now might be answered in the presentation that's coming up. So I think we'll turn to the Brussels presentation to see what has been going on this side. And this is who I am. I haven't presented myself yet. I'm Thomas Jorgensen. I'm Senior Policy Coordinator for the EUA. And we're at the EUA webinar. That should be clear to everybody. There we go. So just to go a little bit back in time, on the 24th of June, we immediately issued a statement that the UK universities will always be part of the European family. EUA is not limited to EU universities, and we have a long history that goes beyond the European Union, although we find the European Union very helpful as a framework. We had a statement signed by 25 rectors' conferences, or 24 rectors' conferences, shortly afterwards, ensuring that we want to keep working together with British universities. Then we went down into the different regulations. We tried to produce some facts. We very soon pointed to association agreements as a possible solution, so that you sort of latch on to an existing European program, even though you're not an EU member state. That is completely possible. We tried to argue how that was possible in the early fall, and we came out with a fact sheet later on, explaining some data about why we thought it would be a good idea to have association agreement. All that can be downloaded. You'll get a link afterwards. Oh, there you go. So what do we know about the negotiations? So we know from the negotiation guidelines set by the European Commission negotiation team and approved by the member states, that there'll be two phases. And different from other negotiation strategies, the most difficult things will be dealt with first. So that's a risky way of going, but that's the way it's going. Citizen rights, as Vivienne started out with, is a very important issue. People need to know where they are. We're talking about, I think it's close to 4 million persons so EU citizens in the UK citizens in the EU. They need to know what to do with their lives. So that's, of course, very logical that you'd start there, but it is also very tough, because the demands from the member states and from the parliaments are that you have to have the same rights for everybody born before the UK leaves, and guaranteed by the European Court of Justice. That means if somebody is born on the 28th of March 2019, so just before the UK formally leaves, this person will, for all his or her life, be guaranteed the EU citizen rights forever, guaranteed by the Court of Justice. And that will, for instance, include university fees, because EU citizens now have access to university fees just as UK citizens. And that should then be for everybody that's born up until the cutoff date. So you can imagine that this is a pretty tough start. And we can only hope for that there'll be some kind of compromise. Just when we talk about researchers, there is a special directive that deals with third country researchers entering the European Union, and that's pretty lenient, and that will always be in place. So that's just that there's a legal detail there. Then it's what somebody had called the Brexit bill. I think the neutral term is a settlement of accounts. So it's clear the EU has a budget. It goes for a couple of years longer than Brexit. So the UK will be out before the budget period is over. That means that the UK has committed to spending X amount of money on structural funds, or Horizon 2020 and Erasmus Plus, but those are very small parts of the global amount. And how do we calculate how much the UK will have to keep paying into these things after? So you can see that's a very difficult political discussion. What is good in this is that there are hints from the European Commission that if the UK pays into programs like Horizon 2020 after it has formally left the European Union, it should of course be able to benefit from these programs. As you can see, this is the first time we don't know very much. The methodology for the calculation is part of the negotiations, and it is extremely complicated. Any of you like to study these things, it's extremely interesting, but it's very, very complicated. Third issue, which does not touch universities outside the Irish Republic, Northern Ireland, the UK, is the Irish border, of course. There is a land border between the UK and the European Union, and that needs to be settled. It's, of course, hugely important for our Irish and Northern Irish members, but in the big scheme of things, we'll just let it rest there. Phase 2, which will only begin once everybody agrees that phase 1 is manageable, sufficient progress, as it's called. Phase 2 will be on an agreement for an orderly withdrawal. It will be about the future relationship. No one, I think, believes that we'll have a full trade agreement in the short amount of time that we're dealing with, but it will be a framework, and it will most likely deal with trade and access to the central market, the internal market. The goal of all this is to have the minimal disruption. So you'd negotiate a framework for how to leave in a way that there'll be very little disruption. This also goes for programs like Horizon 2020 and Erasmus Plus. You can see a quote there that negotiations should seek to prevent a legal vacuum once the treaty cease to apply to the United Kingdom. You can interpret that, once you know EU lingo, you can interpret that in a number of ways, because the treaties will cease to apply in a, let's say, it's not straightforward how that works. So you can interpret this, you can say this is positive. We don't want a vacuum. We don't want there to be a hole where Britain is not member of something and then it becomes member again. But you shouldn't overinterpret this either. It is also about the legal structure. So many times when we see these kinds of quotes, we can say gives reason for hope, but it's not a guarantee. So what more do we know precisely about our areas? So, as I've said before, EUA has been arguing that association agreements were the quick win-win solution. This is how you could keep on having the collaborations that we all agree are good for everybody. Basically, as you see the rules now, if negotiations broke down tomorrow and you have a clean cut, you'd still actually be able to make an association agreement, because the rules for being associated to these programs are very loose. Countries like Tunisia or Israel are associated to Horizon 2020, for instance. Russia is associated to Erasmus Plus. So legally, it's possible. Politically, will this be part of the negotiations? As Vivienne mentioned, research and to some degree higher education has been mentioned in several speeches. It's definitely not forgotten. You'll see here another quote by Barnier. Barnier is a very meticulous man, it seems. He actually, you can take these quotes and they are more or less the same. That you say, we first need the three big issues. Phase one, as you remember, the citizen rights, the accounts, the border to Ireland. Then we need to have an orderly withdrawal, and then we can begin to look at the association agreements for research. But as Vivienne also pointed to, he usually, and he's done this on at least 2 or 3 occasions, points to, once he's done with the main things, the trade, then it's the research. And we see that as a pretty positive thing, because we do believe that once you get the time to sit down and talk about research and higher education, these are not highly complicated legal issues, and you can see the EUA fact sheet how that would work. But it's of course not the top of the agenda. Things like financial passporting, access to the internal market, citizen rights are obviously more important in the first round. So what can we do about this? We're fairly positive. This is doable, but we need to, those of us who want this to happen, who want these association agreements so that we can continue to collaborate with our UK partners. We should argue for this at the national level, also at the European Parliament, which the EUA is doing already. Because Barnier sets the agenda, but he does not decide. Everything that Barnier, the chief negotiator, has as a result goes back to the member states, and they will have to vote on it unanimously. Everybody has to agree. It's not an easy thing. Then, of course, we do need to argue for this at the European level and make sure that it is part of the negotiation, so that we can hopefully get a smooth transition from Horizon 2020 and into FP9. Another thing we can do is keep working with the UK. It's still the largest research power in Europe. There's no two opinions about that. It is remaining in Horizon 2020 and Erasmus Plus at least until the formal Brexit, probably beginning of April 2019. There's no reason to a priori discard UK partners. I think this is an important issue. And you need to be rational about the risks. We've heard about the guarantee. It says here next presentation, but it's because it was before, of course, the previous presentation. There are these guarantees issued by the British government. That is very important. You also need to see the risk of not collaborating with a strong partner and choose a weaker partner instead. So there's a need to be cool-headed about this, not fear that the sky will fall because you might partner up with a British university. So that's very important. If we keep working with the UK today, there's a good chance that we will keep working with the UK in the future. Then, very important, we need to hope for the best here. But there's a decent chance that we'll succeed. Not a guarantee, but a decent chance. If you want to know more, and I've hinted at these fact sheets and other things that we have, you can also see all the statements that EUA has done alone with other rectors conferences and with the UK. We have a Brexit page, which is in a very weak font. You can see that below, but you have that also in an email afterwards. So I'll close here and say thank you for your attention. And we'll have Vivienne back in a moment. Thank you.
Sorry, hello.
Okay, so we can start. We need to mute. Okay. There we go. Some of the questions from the last time around. What is the likelihood of Brexit negotiation delaying the preparation of Erasmus Plus and FP9? That's one of the things that we don't know. Probably it's not that it will be FP9 and Erasmus Plus, but it might be the whole budget. Again, we're out on the speculative here. The UK leaving the European Union will make what we see today. Many of the countries that used to get more money than they paid will now pay more than they get. It's not decided whether we want to cut the whole budget by the amount that the UK pays, or we want to share between us and the EU27 the amount that the UK used to pay. We simply don't know that. I think Erasmus Plus and FP9 are, again, it's not the top priority. It will be the whole MFF that might suffer. But again, we don't know. We really don't know. Then I think this is more to Vivienne. Will the exchange agreements remain as they are, or change into study abroad agreements on a tuition paying basis?
Yeah. The best answer, I think, has been given by Annette Kratz, who's also on the who's joined the webinar, and she's said that from Surrey's point of view, as an individual university, the University of Surrey has already been in touch with all of their Erasmus partners, committing to extend those agreements to the end of the programme. Individual universities will have their own approach, but it would certainly be possible, as long as you can maintain a balance, to agree student exchange agreements where fees are waived. It's simply a question of the agreement between institutions.
Then we have another one. Yeah.
Sorry, I'll mute again.
It's more about the fear and possible attractiveness of other EU countries to have brain drain from Britain. Is that something you talk about in the UK?
Sorry.
Can you repeat that, please?
I repeat that, sorry. I think this is a significant source of concern. I think that, with one hat on, I think that the movement of scholars around Europe is a good thing. So if people spend some time in UK universities and then they go and work somewhere else, well, probably in terms of the kind of grand scheme of human knowledge, that's a plus and not a minus. From the point of view of UK universities, obviously, we want to hold on to those people who are outstanding. We want to give them the conditions where they can, be really certain that it's a great place to make their career. I think those conditions will be in place. I think that my own prediction is that it will be possible for European staff to continue to live and work here as they have in the past, and that we will be able to access European platforms as we have in the past. But understandably, that period of uncertainty is really hard, especially when you're making long-term decisions about where to locate a family, where your children go to school. So we understand that, and of course that's why we're pressing our government for strong statements on this subject and early action and early decision.
Then I probably have a question for you, Vivienne. There is a discourse in the UK that, well, we might lose out in Europe, but we can make up for it by being more global. Do you think that this day and age is actually that is a trade-off, that you can have more global, more Europe, or are we all just one big global research community?
Can you hear me? Yeah, I've said many times, we are international in the UK university sector, but we're European first. When you look at the network of research collaborations, as I have said, 60% of our international co-authored output has a European co-author. 17% of our academic staff are from the European Union. 5% of our students, over half of our research active staff in some institutions are European Union staff. I think we don't have to see these things as alternatives. And I think if I have a frustration with the domestic debate, sometimes you get European and non-European engagement presented as alternatives, and they're not alternatives. We absolutely want to see a platform for stronger collaboration with other advanced economies. Our first, by volume, collaborative partner is the US. So of course we want to see that grow. Same with Australia and Canada and India and China and all of that. But I don't think that should be seen as a substitute. And the other thing I would say is that in the UK, I think we have a pretty well-developed network of funding agreements that facilitate research collaboration with non-European partners. But there's nothing like the framework programs. I mean, there's nothing that is long-term, multilateral, stable, and so broad in its approach. So I think, it frustrates me when people present these as alternatives. But I would say that, there is plenty of evidence in our strong international connections that even outside the European Union, there's no reason why staff and students shouldn't come here, because they do come here from Australia and the US and Canada and India and China and all over the world. So we, at least this should give us some positive reason to think that even outside of the European Union, we will continue to collaborate with our European counterparts, even if the mechanisms are different.
Okay, that's very good. So I can see people are still typing a bit, but it doesn't look like that there are any more questions. Let's see. I think that's actually a very good one that just came in here last minute. So how can European higher education institutions how can it achieve its main aims in the
It's an absolutely great question. Thank you, Marcus. You have been. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Can you hear me now? Sorry, I think I might have turned myself off at the same time as somebody else turned me on. And Marcus, I think that's an absolutely great question. I think it's a really important question, and here's the simple answer. We need European voices being raised in support of the things that we're arguing in the UK. So we need other European counterparts to explain that it is in their benefit, in their interests, that there should be a basis for collaboration with the UK. If that's what you believe, I would encourage you to say it publicly. I would encourage you to say it to your political masters. I would encourage you to persuade your political leaders to make statements of the kind that Barnier and Theresa May have made, just to keep collaboration in higher education and research on the political agenda. And then the other thing is that if there are dividing lines, if there are things that you are concerned about, if that you come across in your own networks issues that could stand in the way of a political agreement being achieved, please tell us, because the closer our ear is to the ground, the better we can inform our strategy, and the better I think bodies like the EUA will be placed to help us navigate this really quite uncertain journey.
Okay, then I think there's one last question here. So how can we as universities convince governments and the general public about why we need to collaborate in the EU? I think I'll have a shot on that one. Say the very simple couple of liner answer is, we know very well that collaborative research is better than non-collaborative research, which means if you are together in international teams, your research will have higher impact factor, it will have a higher quality. This is something that there's no discussion about. So we need to collaborate. In some fields, we simply need to collaborate because things have gone so complex, so we cannot do it a small national team alone. And so that's why we need to collaborate. Why do we need to collaborate in Europe? We need to collaborate in Europe because we have a strength of having many different research and higher education systems that can learn from each other. And we have to admit that the UK plays a very particular role there because it's such a powerhouse. We talked a lot about research here in research, but it is also by far the most popular destination for mobile students in Europe. It's about 30% of mobile students that are in the UK. So it's simply a fact of also saying we want mobile students because we know mobile students have better chances, that they're more empowered. And a lot of European students will, in the short term, not be able to be mobile if you take the UK out of the equation. So there's some very simple reasons why we want to do that. And it's not, is it in the UK's interest, is it in the EU 27 interest or national interest? We should be there where it's pretty evident to all that when we talk research and higher education, it's not an all-sum game. The more we collaborate, the better we get. And I think this is a message that goes beyond Brexit and non-Brexit, but very, very important for the whole world. So unless Vivienne has a final comment, I think I'll cut it off here and go to the ending.
I agree with every word you said. I think that we have to get better at making that case to a wider public audience. It exercises us greatly in the UK that we haven't done a better job of that. I think the best resource we have is stories. And so that's what we're working on, just illustrating the benefits to everybody of, 10 universities putting their heads together and their unique expertise to, deal with a particular type of cancer or a particular public, public health issue or a challenge in relation to clean energy. It's just we have to get better at telling the stories. And then my final word would be to say to thank you for hosting this event and to thank everybody for joining. I know there are some questions that haven't been answered, and I'd be really happy to take them offline if that was possible. Okay, so thank you very much. Thank you very much, Vivienne. I think that was great to hear directly how you see it from Britain. I think it's very important that we have these opportunities to talk across the continent and not think that we're in different camps, because we really aren't. So I also always want to say thank you to the participants. We had a lot of participants this time. It was quite impressive. I hope you got something out of it. If you didn't, you will have a chance to say so, because we will send you a mail with an evaluation form where please say your honest opinion on about how you like the webinar. You will get this mail. We have our Brexit website, which was shown in slides. You'll be able to see the slides. You'll be able to see the recording. If you enjoyed it so much you want to re-watch it tonight, it will be possible. And if you
think that you want to see more EUA webinars, we have a number of recorded webinars. We will have a new series coming up very soon, so look at the EUA newsletter, look at Twitter, and we will announce it as soon as we have it ready. So I think that was all for me. Thank you very much again, and have a good day. Bye.